Hi, my name is Mary Ellen Kelm, and I'm a settler, and I'm here to read part of the very important Truth and Reconciliation Commission report, pages 219 to 220, Community Programs. In 1996, Parliament legislated principles that would allow offenders who might otherwise be imprisoned to serve their sentences in the community. A centerpiece of these reforms was Section 718.2e of the Criminal Code, which instructs judges that all available sanctions other than imprisonment that are reasonable in the circumstances should be considered for all offenders, with particular attention to the circumstances of Aboriginal offenders. In 1999, in R.V. Gladue, the Supreme Court stated that Section 718.2e of the Criminal Code was enacted in response to alarming evidence that Aboriginal people were incarcerated disproportionately to non-Aboriginal people in Canada. The court stressed that this section is a remedial provision enacted specifically to oblige the judiciary to make special efforts to find reasonable alternatives to imprisonment for Aboriginal offenders and to take into account the background and systemic factors that bring Aboriginal people into contact with the justice system. In some jurisdictions, the Gladue decision has resulted in the production of more extensive pre-sentence or Gladue reports that detail the background and contextual circumstances of Aboriginal offenders. These reports help inform judges' sentencing decisions and are meant to encourage alternative options to incarceration. However, bringing these reports to court has not been without difficulty and controversy. Some jurisdictions provide few resources for the intensive, specialized, and culturally sensitive work that is necessary to produce an adequate Gladue report, despite the clear mandate given by the Supreme Court. In 2012, the Supreme Court revisited and reaffirmed Gladue. In R.V. Ipili, the Supreme Court pointed out that some judges had erred in their application of Gladue by concluding that it did not apply to serious offenses, or that it required an offender to demonstrate a causal connection between the commission of the crime and the legacy of residential schools, or other background or contextual factors that help explain why an Aboriginal offender is before the courts. Even if excellent Gladue reports were prepared from coast to coast, they would still fail to make a difference in the amount of Aboriginal overrepresentation in the prison system without the addition of realistic alternatives to imprisonment, including adequate resources for intensive community programs that can respond to the conditions that caused Aboriginal offending. Call to Action 31. We call upon the federal, provincial, and territorial governments to provide sufficient and stable funding to implement and evaluate community sanctions that will provide realistic alternatives to imprisonment for Aboriginal offenders and respond to the underlying causes of offending. A failure to provide sufficient and stable resources for the community and treatment programs that are necessary to implement Gladue and Ipili helps explain why those decisions have not slowed increasing Aboriginal overrepresentation in prison. In addition to these significant challenges, there are now new barriers to implementing effective and just alternative sentences for Aboriginal offenders.